There's a story sailors used to tell. They said on certain nights, the sea would go perfectly still. Not a wave, not a breath of wind, just silence. That's when the men would whisper that the ocean was listening. And if you fell asleep under that kind of silence, you might wake up somewhere you didn't belong. On the wrong ship, in the wrong time. Or worse, not wake up at all. But of course, pirates didn't have the luxury of superstition. Sleep came when it came. Even if the sky was angry and the ship creaked like it was splitting in two, because no matter how wild or wicked a man was, eventually he'd need to lie down, close his eyes, and drift off, even if death was only a wave away. Hey fam, welcome to Sleepy Historian. Before we settle in for tonight's quiet little journey through the strange past, go ahead and subscribe if you haven't already. It helps the channel grow, and it lets me keep telling you slow, soft stories about things you were never meant to remember. Now, get cozy. You know the drill. Dim the lights. Wrap up in a blanket. Turn the fan on low. Put your legs up the wall, if that's your thing. Just settle. Let's talk about pirates. Not the movie kind. The real ones. Crusty, scarred, half-starved men who lived on floating wooden tombs, chasing ships and fortunes, but also looking for sleep. We don't often think about that. We picture them shouting, drinking, fighting. We never ask, where did they sleep? How? What did it sound like at night on a pirate ship? What did it smell like? Was it warm? Did they dream? Tonight, we're going to find out. Not all at once. We'll take our time. We'll rock gently with the waves, swing in worn-out hammocks, and listen to the wind rattle through broken sails as we drift back through time to learn how pirates treated sleep on the high seas. Let's get into it. So, let's talk about where pirates slept. Not just where they dropped their bodies after a long day, but how they made sleep happen in the middle of a noisy, unstable, floating world. If you were lucky, and I mean really lucky, you had a hammock. Now, hammocks weren't some kind of tropical luxury. They weren't there for relaxation. They were there because, well, the floor moved all the time. Wooden ships rolled and bucked constantly. And if you were lying flat on the hard deck during rough weather, you'd be thrown side to side like a bag of bones in a barrel. But the hammock? The hammock swayed with the ship. Tied up at both ends, usually in a dark corner below deck, it became this little cocoon. A cradle, suspended in motion, moving just enough to mimic the waves, but keeping your body still. There's something oddly poetic about it, really. Hard men, wrapped in canvas slings like infants, rocked to sleep by the same sea they cursed all day. But here's the thing. These hammocks were disgusting. They weren't washed. They were made of rough canvas that soaked up sweat, blood, seawater, rum, and whatever else a pirate might spill during his shift. Some had holes. Some were infested with lice or fleas. And the smell? Let's just say that when men slept too long in them, the fabric remembered. Still, pirates preferred that to sleeping on the deck, because down below, under the gun deck, it was dark, and darkness meant you could pretend it was night, even if it wasn't. There were no windows, no stars, just the creak of wood, the distant lap of waves, and the soft, wet breathing of 50 men, all trying not to snore too loud. You couldn't move around much. Hammocks were hung close together, shoulder to shoulder. You'd swing with the person next to you. If they rolled over, you felt it. If they coughed, you definitely felt it. But still, it was sleep, a kind of sleep, interrupted, shallow, but necessary. And when you slept in a hammock, you didn't lie flat. Your legs were bent. Your arms curled in. Your back was hunched slightly. There was a trick to it, how you tied the ropes. Too tight, and it was like sleeping on a slab. Too loose, and you'd roll out in the middle of the night. There were stories of men who fell from their hammocks during storms, only to be thrown across the room, or wake up in puddles of bilge water. Sometimes they didn't wake up at all. Now imagine the smell. The air down there wasn't fresh. There was no ventilation, just the occasional rat, and the constant stink of unwashed bodies, rotting wood, mold, and cannon grease. And that's where you had to sleep. No pillow, no blanket. Unless you stole one or earned it from a captain who had a soft spot. You curled up in your sweat-stained sling, maybe with a hat over your face. And you listened to the ship groaning, to the guy next to you grinding his teeth, to someone farting across the room, to the faint knock of waves against the hull. And then, if your body cooperated, you slept, not deeply, not peacefully, but enough to keep going. Some men never got used to it. They'd lie awake for hours, thinking of land, of beds, of women, of silence. Others, they passed out as soon as their boots hit the floor. Because when you spent the whole day hoisting sails, fighting currents, rationing food, watching your crewmate die from an infected tooth, you don't need comfort. You just need the permission to shut your eyes. And then there are those rare nights when the sea was calm and the ship was still and no one shouted your name. And in those moments, the hammock became something else. A little pocket of peace, a quiet in the chaos, a place where, just for a few hours, a pirate wasn't a pirate. He was just a man, tired, still, asleep. You'd think that once the crew was asleep, the ship would go quiet. But on a pirate vessel, it never truly did. Even in the dead of night, someone was always awake. Someone had to be. Ships, after all, don't pause just because the sun goes down. And pirates? They didn't trust the sea or each other. So while some tried to drift off in their hammocks, grumbling, adjusting, scratching, others stood watch, up on deck, pacing slowly, scanning the darkness for shadows that didn't belong, watching for ships, watching for storms, watching for anything that moved or didn't. They called them the watchmen. Young, old, whatever, it didn't matter. Everyone took turns. 2 hours on, 2 hours off. That was the rhythm. You'd hear the bell ring softly. One man would climb down into darkness. Another would climb up, yawning, scratch his head. He'd take his position, sometimes behind the mast, sometimes near the helm, wrapped in a coat, maybe a scarf, breathing in cold, salty air, eyes stinging from wind. Above, the sails flapped. Below, the ship creaked like an old man groaning in his sleep. And all around him, nothing, just water, endless water, lit only by moonlight if the clouds allowed it. Some nights, the sea was gentle, almost friendly, and the watchmen would hum to themselves, fiddle with their belts, whisper to each other if they weren't alone. Sometimes they'd share quiet stories, things they couldn't say during the day, where they came from, who they used to be, what they feared. These were the soft hours, the human hours, when pirates became people again. But not every night was like that. There were stories of things spotted in the water, figures that didn't float right, eyes glowing just below the surface, whispers that didn't belong to anyone on board. The night did strange things to a man's mind, especially when he was tired, especially when he hadn't slept properly in days. Some claim they saw ghost ships, ships that mirrored their own exactly. Same sails, same shape, just silent, floating beside them, then disappearing into fog. Others heard voices, calling from the sea, women's voices, soft and slow. No one ever admitted to answering back. Then there were the practical dangers, like fires. A stray spark from the galley could light a rope ablaze. And on a wooden ship filled with tar, oil, and dry canvas, it didn't take long. So watchmen had to keep an eye on that too. Make sure no one was smoking below deck. Make sure no lanterns were left burning. It was a lonely job. Necessary, but lonely. You stood there in the middle of nowhere, with nothing but stars above and shadows below. And all the while, you knew what waited for you. Not rest, not reward, just the next watch, or the next storm, or worse, the next attack. Sleep wasn't guaranteed, not even when it was your turn, because you might lie down, pull your coat over your chest, close your eyes, and suddenly hear a bell, or a gunshot, or a scream, and just like that, you were up, rushing to your post, stumbling through darkness, still half asleep, eyes burning, heart pounding. There was no apology for waking you, no sympathy, just orders. Pirate life didn't care if you were tired. The sea didn't care. So sleep came in pieces. A half hour here, a nap leaning against the mast, a hammock swing between cannon shifts. There were no 8-hour nights, no weekends, no days off, only the sound of the bell, the whispers of the sea, and the weight of your own eyes trying to close, even when they couldn't. And that's what made the watchmen so important. They were the ones who let the others sleep, or tried to. They were the thin, exhausted line between rest and ruin. And maybe that's what made those few good nights so special. When nothing happened, when the stars stayed put, the wind stayed calm, and the sea remembered how to be gentle. And for just a few hours, the watchman leaned on the railings, closed one eye, and let the ocean breathe without interruption. Because on a pirate ship, even silence was rare. Even silence was sacred. Pirates didn't have much. Not land, not law, not a future they could count on. But they did have superstitions. Lots of them, especially about sleep. Because when you live your life in chaos, you start looking for patterns, signs, warnings. Sleep became one of those signs. To pirates, the way you slept, the dreams you had, the noises you made in the night, they all meant something. There was a belief among some crews that if a man dreamed of drowning, he'd be next. Not next to have a bad dream, next to go overboard. So if someone woke up gasping, sweating, saying he felt water in his lungs, the others would mark it. They'd watch him, quietly, respectfully, but they'd keep their distance, not out of cruelty, out of caution, because no one wanted to be tied to bad luck. Another common fear? Sleeping with your feet pointed toward the bow of the ship. The bow, the front, was considered the ship's spirit. It cut the waves, faced the storms, held the soul of the journey. If your feet pointed that way while you slept, it was seen as an insult, or worse, an invitation. It meant your soul was ready to leave, that you were prepared for death. And once a rumor like that started, it was hard to shake. Snoring, too, had meaning. Light snoring? Normal. Annoying, but forgivable. But deep, loud, ragged snoring? They said that meant the devil was trying to drag the breath out of your body, that your soul was fighting to stay in. A snore like that was followed by side glances, nervous jokes. Sometimes, a slap to the face to wake the poor guy up, just in case. Then there were dreams. Some pirates believed that dreams were messages from the dead, that those lost at sea returned in sleep, to offer warnings, or revenge. It wasn't uncommon for a man to wake screaming, not from fear of cannon fire, but from the sight of a brother he left behind in battle, now visiting him in silence, standing at the foot of his hammock, mouth full of seawater. They also said that if you dreamed of gold, it meant betrayal was coming, that someone was plotting, planning to steal from you, or stab you while you slept. So if you dreamed of treasure, you didn't brag about it. You didn't laugh it off. You kept it to yourself. And you watched your back. Because men don't just fight over gold. They kill over it. Even friends. Even shipmates. And then there were nights when sleep wouldn't come. Not because of storms. Not because of noise. But because the ship felt wrong. Like it was moving too smoothly. Or creaking too little. Or humming in a way no one could explain. Veteran pirates called that the hush. It was said to come before something bad. A mutiny. A curse. Or the ship crossing into water it should have avoided. So on those nights, sleep was resisted. Men stayed up, told stories, played dice, pretended not to be afraid. Because when you admit fear to the sea listens. There were rituals, too. Some tied small bones, bird bones, fish bones, into their hammocks for protection. Some muttered prayers in languages they didn't speak anymore. Some scratched crosses or strange marks into the wood beside them. And if someone did die in their sleep, the hammock was cut down, burned if possible, thrown into the ocean if not, because no one wanted to lie where death had rested. It sounds dramatic now, but when you live your whole life at the edge of a blade, floating over endless water, fighting sickness, hunger, violence, and time, you start to look for any control, even in dreams, even in how you lay your head down. And sometimes those little rituals, those whispers before sleep, they were the only thing standing between a man and the darkness, not just the darkness of night, but the other kind, the kind that never wakes you up. There are tired nights, and then there are storm nights. On a pirate ship, you didn't just lose sleep during a storm. You forgot what sleep even was, because the moment the wind picked up and the clouds gathered into a bruised sky, you knew what was coming. Not just rain, not just waves, but chaos and fear and hours of holding on to whatever you could, your rope, your hope, your sanity. The hammocks would be abandoned first, too dangerous to stay suspended. Men would fall out of them mid-swing, crash against cannon barrels, floorboards, or each other, so they'd stagger out, wet already from the leaking ceiling, wrapping belts around their waists, grabbing onto iron rings or wall pegs. The floor would tilt without warning, sometimes 5 feet, sometimes more. Everything loose became a weapon. Barrels rolled, buckets slammed into legs, knives slid from shelves, lanterns swung like angry ghosts. And through it all, no one slept, not even for a second. You'd see men, wide-eyed, silent, leaning into the wall, muttering to themselves, praying, or just staring, because storms lasted hours, sometimes an entire night, sometimes longer. No end in sight, no land nearby, no safety, just wind and waves, and the horrible sound would splintering just a little too loud. Some pirates learned to close their eyes for seconds at a time. Little half-sleeps, 10 seconds here, a minute there, leaning against a stair post, curled in a dry corner, if such a thing existed. But those weren't real sleeps. They were resets, tiny flickers of rest before the ship screamed again. And if you did happen to doze off during the eye of the storm, chances are you'd be snapped awake by a crashing barrel, or someone vomiting nearby, or worse, the sea rushing in through the lower deck. Sleep deprivation did something to these men. It stripped away the last bits of patience, of humanity. Fights would break out over nothing. Someone breathing too loud, someone bumping a shoulder, someone using your cup without asking. And if the storm lasted long enough, you'd start to hear things, voices, songs, names of people who weren't on board, laughter where no one stood. A few pirates went mad from it. They'd start talking to the ocean, calling it mother, telling its secrets, and then jump, or just disappear. The captains knew this. So during long storms, they tried to keep order, assign roles, get men moving, move the water barrels, secure the sails, repack the cannon ropes. Not because it always needed doing, but because it kept the mind busy. Still, there were moments when that failed. Moments when every man stood still, holding on, listening to the moan of the hull, to the thunder above, to the feeling in their guts that the ship was too tired to keep going, that this might be the night it gave up. And when a ship gives up, it doesn't die slowly. It snaps, breaks, tips, drowns. Quickly, so men stared, eyes bloodshot, fingers dug into the walls, jaw clenched, as if holding their teeth in place could somehow hold the storm back. They didn't speak. They didn't blink. They just endured. And when the storm finally passed, when the sky began to break, and the waves stopped screaming, and the creaking slowed to a whisper, that's when exhaustion came rushing in, not gently, not politely, like a wall collapsing inward. Some men dropped to the floor and slept, right there, in water, in filth, in fear. Others walked in circles, shaking, still not convinced it was over. The body doesn't trust peace after chaos. Sometimes they didn't even remember falling asleep. They'd wake hours later, with sore necks, wet clothes, dry blood on their hands, and no memory of how they got back to the hammock, only that they survived. Again, storms didn't just take rest. They stole memory, sanity, kindness, but sleep always returned. Eventually, because the body insists, even in fear, even on broken ships, even on the edge of the world, it insists on sleep. And pirates, for all their sins and scars, were still human, still bound to that quiet need, to rest, even if the sea made them pay for every moment of it. Let's go below deck, all the way down, where it was always dark, where the air never moved, where the sound of footsteps overhead was constant, like whispers from giants. This was the gun deck. And yes, pirates slept here too, right beside the cannons, because on smaller ships, there was nowhere else. You shared your sleep with the tools of war. The cannons were enormous, iron beasts, each one weighing up to 2 tons. They were tied in place with thick ropes, mounted on wooden wheels, always ready to be rolled into position at the first sign of trouble. But when it wasn't battle time, they just sat there, silent, heavy, still smelling of smoke and powder. And above them, that's where the hammocks were strung. Dozens of them, side by side, swung from the beams just a few feet over those monstrous guns. You could wake up, look straight down, and see the mouth of a cannon staring back at you. Sometimes you were so close, your hammock touched it. It was terrifying at first, but pirates got used to it. They had to, because that space between cannon and ceiling was the only place on the ship where hammocks could be hung in any real number. It was compact, shielded from the wind, relatively dry, but it was also dangerous, because cannons weren't just for decoration. They were loaded, prepped, ready to fire with almost no warning. And if battle broke out at night, no matter what time it was, you were out of that hammock in seconds. You had to be. Some men slept fully clothed, boots on, gun near, because they knew that any second the bell might ring, the captain might shout, and your rest, no matter how deep, was over. You rolled out, your feet hit the floor, you grabbed your station, sleep forgotten. The gun deck also echoed. Every creak, every whisper, every breath bounced between the iron and the wood. When someone snored, it wasn't just a little noise. It filled the space, bounced off the cannons, made the deck feel alive, made the metal sound like it was breathing. Some said that was the worst part. Not the threat of violence, but the sound, like the ship was dreaming, like it was full of lungs. Then there was the smell, gunpowder, old fire, grease, sweat, blood, mixed into the grain of the wood, stuck in the iron of the guns. Some men developed headaches. Others got nosebleeds, but there were no complaints, because complaints didn't matter. You were lucky to have a hammock at all, lucky to be inside, lucky to be alive. There were other dangers, too. Rats loved the gun deck. They scurried between the hammocks, climbed ropes, chewed through sacks and sleeves. Some were bold enough to run across sleeping chests, nibble fingers, even nest inside boots. The men cursed them, but no one really fought them off. There was a strange truce there. You ignore them, they ignore you. Usually, unless there was a storm. Then they ran wild, and everyone just pretended not to notice. Now imagine trying to sleep here, above a cannon, beside a rat, under someone else's hammock, with the air still thick and sour, and your ears full of ghost breath snoring. But somehow men did it. They curled into their canvas cocoons. They adjusted their ropes. They tied their pistols close. And they closed their eyes, because the gun deck was scary. But it was also the only place where you weren't expected to do anything for a few hours. You weren't hoisting sails. You weren't watching the horizon. You weren't scrubbing decks. You were resting. And even if your rest sat inches above a barrel meant to kill, it was still rest. Some pirates said they slept better next to cannons, said it made them feel safe, because the guns were loyal, predictable, honest, unlike men. And if a storm came, or a battle began, you were already close to your weapon. No scrambling, no delay, Just one roll, one stretch, and you were ready. So yes, pirates slept among the cannons, not because it was ideal, but because it was possible. And when you've lived long enough at sea, you stop chasing comfort. You chase stillness. You chase quiet. You chase the moment when nothing needs you, even if it's just 20 minutes, rocking gently above a gun, in the belly of a ship that smells like fire and rats. That was sleep, and it was enough. Time didn't exist on a pirate ship the way it does for us. There weren't days off. There weren't weekends. There wasn't even night in the way we know it, just light and dark, work, and the chance to sleep. Pirates lived by the watch system. That meant every 24 hours was chopped up into slices. Shifts, they called them watches, for hours on, for hours off, 2 hours on, 2 hours off, over and over, around the clock, no matter the weather, no matter how tired you were, no matter if you'd just fallen asleep. If it was your time to be awake, you got up, or someone else would make you. The schedule was brutal. Imagine finally closing your eyes, just beginning to drift, finally feeling your body let go, and then the bell rings. You don't get to finish the dream. You don't get to roll over. You sit up, you swing your legs out, you wipe your face, and you move, because the ship demands it. Some watches were easier than others. The mid-watch, for example, midnight to 4 a.m., was infamous. Cold, quiet, lonely. Most of the crew would be asleep. You'd be on deck, fighting wind, watching the horizon, just you and the stars. A lot of pirates hated that one. Too much time to think, too much silence. Others, though, preferred it. They said the ship felt softer at night, more honest, like it exhaled while the crew slept. There was something intimate about it. You heard every creak, every wave, every memory. The dog watches were shorter, from 4 to 6 p.m. and 6 to 8 p.m., 2 hours each. They were designed to rotate everyone's schedule, so no one had the same watch every day. That way, everyone suffered equally, fair in a cruel sort of way. Sleep then became fragmented. You never got a full night. You got naps, 2 hours here, for hours there, a half hour during calm weather, maybe a stolen moment behind a stack of barrels if the captain wasn't looking. This did strange things to the body. It confused your sense of time. It blurred days together. It made memories flicker, half-formed and disconnected. Pirates sometimes forgot what day it was, where they were sailing to, what month it might be, because when you're always waking up, always getting pulled from sleep before it's finished, your brain stops bothering to keep track. Some pirates learned tricks to fall asleep faster. They'd lie down and count the sway of the ship. 1, 2, 3. They'd hum low notes under their breath, chew a bit of tobacco just before bed, or repeat the names of people they loved. Not because it helped, but because it gave them something to hold on to. In the few minutes they had before sleep was taken again, others fought it, tried to stay awake between watches, played cards, drank, told stories. They said it wasn't worth it to sleep for only 2 hours. But eventually everyone broke. The body always wins. It shuts down whether you want it to or not. Some men fell asleep while eating, others while standing. There were stories of pirates collapsing mid-sentence, not from exhaustion alone, but from the rhythm, that endless drumbeat of time that didn't stop, even when you begged it to. And then you'd hear the bell again, soft at first, then louder, ringing through the ship, bouncing off wood and iron, slicing through dreams. It was time, again, no matter how warm your hammock was, no matter how soft your stolen sleep had become. The bell meant work, meant duty, meant you were no longer allowed to rest. And so you rose, half asleep, eyes aching, mouth dry. You did what pirates did best. You obeyed the sea. They say that after months of this, you stopped feeling tired in the usual way. You were always tired, so you didn't notice anymore. Sleep became a memory, something you used to know. And the rare moments of deep rest, when they came, they felt like drowning, not gently, Suddenly, completely, your body would drag you under. And if the ship didn't need you for a few extra minutes, you might actually stay down long enough to dream. But most of the time, you just got used to waking up, over and over and over, until it became part of you. Just like the sea, just like the ship, just like the quiet misery of never being fully rested. That was pirate sleep, a series of interruptions. A clock that didn't care who you were, or how long you'd gone without peace. Only that it was time. Not all sleep on a pirate ship was equal. While the crew twisted into hammocks and curled up beside rats and cannon barrels, the captain had a room, a real one, with walls, with a door, and sometimes with a bed, or something close to it. It was called the captain's cabin, and it sat at the stern of the ship, tucked just under the raised deck at the back. It was the only private space on board, and for many captains, it was the closest thing to peace they'd ever know at sea. Now, don't get the wrong idea. It wasn't luxurious. There weren't feather mattresses or scented pillows, but there was space. Space to move, space to sit, space to stretch out without bumping into another man's elbow. There were walls that didn't leak, or at least didn't leak as much. And there were windows, small round ones, that let in actual daylight. Some captains even had curtains. His bed? It varied. Sometimes a cot, sometimes a mattress on a wooden frame, sometimes just a padded bench with blanket. But it was raised off the floor, covered, often, clean, at least cleaner than the hammocks. And most importantly, it was as alone. No sharing, no snoring neighbors, no swaying canvas. Just a quiet place to lie down and breathe. Of course, being the captain didn't mean you got to sleep whenever you wanted. In fact, most pirate captains slept less than their crew because they had more to worry about. Mutinies, storms, decisions, discipline, routes, gold. Everything came back to him. So even when he was in his cabin, curled under a ruffled blanket, it wasn't always restful. His ears stayed sharp, always listening, for footsteps, for arguing voices, for the silence that meant something had gone wrong. He didn't have watches like the others, no official shift, but he often woke before the sun, stayed up after midnight, paced the deck while others slept, not because he had to, but because leadership doesn't rest easily, especially not on a ship full of men who might turn on you for a coin, or a curse, or just a bad mood. Some captains locked their doors when they slept. Others left them open, a signal of trust, or confidence, or maybe just carelessness. A few even posted guards outside, but that was rare. On most pirate ships, everyone was technically equal. The captain was elected, not born into the role, not handed it by a crown. He had to earn his crew's respect, and he had to keep it, or lose everything, including his place to sleep. Still, there were perks. The captain could sleep through storms. If he wanted, he could assign others to manage the crew, while he rested in the dark, tucked beneath a map-covered ceiling, with his sword beside his bed, and his dreams full of ocean ghosts. He could wake up slowly, stretch, yawn, sit for a while before putting on his boots. He didn't have to jump up at the sound of the bell, didn't have to fight for space or quiet. His cabin was the only room on the ship where time slowed down, even if just a little. Some crew members envied him, some respected him, some pretended to do both. But they all knew the captain's sleep came at a cost, because if something went wrong, it was his fault. If they hit a reef, if they were low on supplies, if they were being followed, it was his head on the block. So while the crew snatched rest in crowded silence, the captain slept with the weight of every man's life balanced on his chest. That kind of sleep, it's never deep, but still, there were quiet nights, rare ones, when the stars above his cabin were steady, when the ship didn't groan, when no one knocked on the door. And on those nights, the captain would lie back, close his eyes, and remember the land, the smell of dirt, the feel of a real pillow. The sound of rain on a tiled roof. He'd fall asleep, not as a captain, not as a pirate, but just as a man, adrift in his own thoughts. Save for a little while, in the only space that still belonged to him. No one ever said pirate life was healthy. In fact, most pirates were already dying when they signed up. From poverty, from disease, from wounds they'd never had time to heal. So imagine what sleep looked like. For a man whose body was broken and had no doctor to fix it, there were no hospitals at sea, no trained physicians, no antibiotics, no anesthesia. If you got hurt, you were patched up with cloth, rum, and luck. A stab wound, they'd press a hot iron to it. A broken bone, they'd tie it to a board and hope for the best. A fever, they'd pour seawater on you and pray it passed. And in the middle of all that, you still had to sleep. Sometimes they gave you a place near the galley, warmer, less noisy. Sometimes they just let you keep your hammock, while others took your watch shifts. But most of the time, you weren't really resting. You were surviving. Imagine lying on your back in a swaying ship, your leg splinted badly, your arm wrapped in cloth that hadn't been cleaned in weeks. You're sweating, shaking, shivering from fever. Too hot and too cold at the same time. The hammock creaks. The ship groans. Someone nearby coughs. The smell of stew floats up from the deck below, but your stomach twists at the thought of food, and all you want, all you beg for, is sleep. But sleep doesn't come easy when your whole body hurts. They say men talked in their sleep. When they were sick, more than usual, they muttered names. They cursed softly. They cried. Some begged forgiveness. From people they hadn't seen in years. Some confessed secrets. To no one at all. And sometimes they just went silent. So quiet, in fact, that others had to check they were still breathing. Because on a pirate ship, a man could die in his hammock, and no one would notice for hours, especially if he was quiet about it. There were sick beds, if you could call them that. Old hammocks repurposed, folded sails on the floor, a corner behind barrels. Anything that gave a little space, a little privacy. But there were no clean linens, no cooling cloths, no one standing by your side for long. Maybe one crewmate would help, an old friend, a cabin boy, someone who still believed in mercy. But even they wouldn't stay too long, because sickness was catching, and death had a smell. When wounds got infected, the smell turned sharp, sweet almost, sour at the edges. You could smell it before you saw it, and when you did see it, you knew he wasn't going to wake up again. Some pirates, knowing the end was near, refused to sleep. They were afraid, said if they closed their eyes, they wouldn't open them again. So they sat up, leaning against the mast, mumbling to themselves, fighting the pull of rest like it was the sea itself. Others did the opposite. They curled up, turned away, let the pain wash over them, and drifted, because sometimes death felt like sleep, and sleep felt like kindness. If a man died quietly, they'd wait until morning, wrap him in his own hammock, so it shut, usually with the last stitch through the nose, to make sure he was truly gone. Then over the side. No coffin, no grave, just the sea. And the space he left behind? Someone else would sleep there before nightfall, because hammocks were few, and the ship moved on. Always, but not all sickness ended in death. Some men recovered, slowly. They'd sleep for 2 days straight, wake up confused, thirsty, hollow-eyed, then eat, drink, sleep again. And little by little, they returned to life, walked the deck, told stories, laughed again, and slept not like before, more deeply, more gratefully, because they'd seen the edge and come back, and that changed the way you close your eyes, forever. So yes, pirates slept while wounded, while bleeding, while coughing blood into their sleeves, and sometimes the ship rocked them gently enough to let them forget, even if just for a moment, even if only until the pain returned. Eventually, every pirate stopped waking up, whether from battle, sickness, betrayal, or simply time. The sea always took its share. And when it did, there was no casket, no flowers, no headstone to mark the spot. Just a final sleep. And water. Endless water. Death on a pirate ship wasn't rare. It wasn't even surprising. Some men went quickly. A sword through the ribs. A cannon blast. A fall from the rigging during a storm. Others went slowly. A rotting tooth that turned to fever. A wound that wouldn't heal. A breath that never came back full. And when the breath stopped, the crew moved into ritual. Quiet, efficient, solemn in their own way. Because the sea had to be respected, even in death. First, the body was cleaned. Not lovingly, just enough to make it presentable. The hammock, he died and was emptied. Laid out flat, the body placed inside. Arms crossed, eyes closed if they weren't already. Then came the needle. Someone would stitch the hammock shut, one hole at a time, looping the canvas closed until only one part remained. The final stitch, through the nose. It was old tradition, to be sure, because the worst thing a pirate could imagine was being thrown overboard while still alive, even if just barely. Sometimes a stone was placed at the feet to weigh the body down, make sure it sank, disappeared. The sea didn't return what it took. Not always. Not whole. The crew would gather on deck. Not in lines. Not in uniform. But present. Silent. A few words might be said. A name. A curse. A joke. If the man had been well liked. Then the hammock was tilted, lifted, lowered over the edge. And just like that, he was gone. No music. No tears usually. Just a splash. And the space he left behind. Some men were remembered. Their names etched into the wood above a bunk. Their stories told again, louder than truth. He once wrestled a shark. He drank 15 mugs of rum in one night. He never missed a shot. Others were forgotten before the sun set, because the sea didn't keep records. And pirates didn't write eulogies. They just moved on. A new man took the hammock. A new hand gripped the rope. A new name joined the crew, and the ship kept sailing. But there was something deeper, something about sleep and death, that felt connected on the ocean. The two blurred, both quiet, both still, both uncertain. You never knew if the man in the hammock was napping or fading, and sometimes he wasn't sure either, because when you live in chaos, with danger pressing in from all sides, sleep becomes the closest thing you have to death, but safer until one night you cross the line and don't return. The sea was the final bed, the waves the last blanket, the salt a kind of burial cloth. Some pirates believed. The ocean remembered that it carried the stories of the dead. In its depths, whispered them back to the shore, as foam on the tide, sang them into storms, etched them into the hulls of ships. Maybe that's why so many sailors spoke softly. When the water was calm, they were listening to the ones who slept forever. Others believed that pirates who died at sea became part of it, their souls turning into currents, rising into fog, blinking in the stars overhead, and that when a ship creaked at night, with no wind and no waves, it was a sea turning over in its sleep, the dead shifting gently below. In the end, there were no graves, no monuments, no markers on land, but the ocean held them, all of them, the brave, the broken, the forgotten, sleeping in the quiet dark, rocked by the tide, dreaming of wind and light and freedom. So tonight, as you lie in your own bed, in your own quiet room, with no storms, no cannons, no rope against your ribs, let yourself drift, let your thoughts roll like waves, and sleep, not the final kind, just the good kind, the safe kind, because unlike those men, you awake, and they've already gone to sleep, forever. Thank you for watching Sleepy Historian. If this story brought you peace, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. There are more slow stories waiting. Until next time, sleep well if you can.